Hey gang, I've spent half my life introducing people to classic literature. It's basically what I do for a living. If you're new here, I'm Andrew Moore, professor of great books at St. Thomas University. If you're old here, I'm still Andrew Moore, professor of great books. That doesn't change at all. I've put a lot of thought into the classic books that I would recommend to someone who's just starting out reading classic literature. I've got a list of 5 books that I want to share with you. And the first one is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Brave New World is one of the most famous science fiction novels of all time, unquestionably. It's also one of the most famous dystopias of all time. Here's the premise. Genetic and social engineering run amok. That's what's happening. Basically, in this world, in this future vision of London, which is now a part of what Huxley calls the world state, in this futuristic London, families have been abolished. There's no more family. Humans are bred in incubators. No more pregnancies, no more marriages. The principles of mass production have been applied to human biology. And it's worse than that because the state has figured out how to genetically engineer class stratification. So some people are bred to be alphas, to be like leaders, the executives and CEOs, and other people are bred, you've got alphas, betas, gammas, all the way down to the epsilon class. And those people are basically bred to be slaves, to be labor. And so Huxley gives us this unforgettable vision of a world where the principles of engineering, of mass production, of the assembly line have been applied to human biology. There's no romantic or sexual exclusivity. Everybody belongs with everybody else. And you just got to make an appointment to spend some time with someone, horizontally without clothes like that. And, next day, maybe somebody else. Like that's actually, as I'm saying this, it kind of anticipates the apps, doesn't it? I was married before the apps really existed. I don't really know what goes on there, but it sounds awful. But one of the most memorable features of this book, of course, it's a dystopia. What does that mean? There's going to be somebody who doesn't comply, who doesn't conform. And in this book, it's this character, John, who is raised outside the borders of the world state. And John, who's called a savage, he was raised on Shakespeare. He gets his ideas of love from having read Shakespeare. So when he arrives in this London, he has very different ideas about what matters, what life is for. This is a great book. And the reason I like it as a great classic book for beginners, it's kind of a bridge text. If you like science fiction, if you like things like The Hunger Games, or you like Severance, those kinds of shows and stories, you will love Brave New World. Here's the big question that this book wants you to consider. Is suffering good? Is suffering good? Suffering can't be good. That doesn't make any sense. But is there some value in suffering? That's a more difficult question. Isn't it the case that struggle, that yearning are essential parts of what it means to be human? Isn't that kind of part of what it means to be human? And if you live a life that is completely devoted to pleasure, nothing but pleasure and the reduction of suffering, is that still a human life, or do you become something else? Okay, next book on the list. I don't actually have it here. I don't know where it is. I think I left it in my office on campus. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to green screen it in, and then we'll just add it in post-production. This is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I read this book when I was in high school. This is one of the first great books, great novels that I read as a young man. And it worked on me. I dedicated the rest of my life to studying great literature. I do have a theory about this, though, about why this might have worked. See, at its core, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens is about unrequited love. That is like the core thread that runs through the book. It's about unrequited love. So I encountered this book as a teenager, right? That's when I read it. I don't know what your teenage years were like, but I had a lot of affections that were unrequited, right? I feel like that's just like the teenage condition, right? That's just the teenage condition. You got a lot of loves that you don't know, they're not coming back your way. So Great Expectations is a love story. It's also a coming of age story. The main character is this character named Pip. He's an orphan, and his parents have died, and he has to make his way in the world. That's the sort of thrust of this book. Dickens wrote this in the early 1860s, and it was serialized. It was a serialized novel. So parts of it were published, regularly at intervals in magazines. A lot of novels from the 19th century were published this way. It's almost like comic books are published now, like a story that comes out piece by piece every month. Now, I think sometimes with books like this, because they were serialized like that, they are better at holding your attention, because that's sort of what they're designed to do, right? To hold readers' attention for weeks and months at a time. There's a lot of emphasis on plot, on surprises, reversals of fortune. So Pip begins this novel raised by his sister, right? He's raised by his sister and her husband. He eventually falls into the orbit of this woman, one of the most memorable characters in all of literature, Miss Havisham. And Miss Havisham is a woman. She's a jilted lover. She was a woman who was left at the altar. And so in response, she decides to wear her wedding dress every day, ever after. And Miss Havisham has adopted this girl, this young girl named Estella, who's very beautiful. And essentially, Miss Havisham it's like Estella is being bred in a lab. Oh, there's Brave New World again. It's like she's being raised to break hearts, to wreak havoc on men. It's like Miss Havisham's revenge. She's unleashing Estella on the world. And Miss Havisham seems to take this twisted delight in encouraging Pip's affections for Estella, this girl who she's kind of trained, raised, cultivated to be ice cold, to be unfeeling, to be unreceptive to love and affection. And this is not the only instance in the novel where a character uses another person to like get back at the world, or to somehow right or correct perceived wrongs or mistakes in their own life. Dickens' novels are very melodramatic. There's a lot of twists and turns, a lot of improbable plot developments. You've got to just buy into that. That's part of the delight of these books. Many improbable things are going to happen. It's a story about morality, about virtue and vice, guilt and redemption. It's a good one. Hey, by the way, you can check out my Patreon for more book recommendations. I made a video, for example, about my top 12 novels. Why 12? Most people are giving you 10. That's 2 bonus novels. It's like the Costco version of BookTube over there. You can also see what's on my TBR pile. It's a lot of books. Pile keeps getting higher. I keep reading things. The pile keeps getting bigger. I explain that, science. It's like I've fallen victim to a librarian's curse. Anyway, joining the Patreon is a great way to support the channel and all the stuff I do here. I want to say thank you to everyone who's already signed up for the Patreon. I'm so appreciative. Love chatting with you all in the comments over there. You are amazing. Okay, next, kind of a modern classic. This is Sula, written by Toni Morrison. Now, this book was written in 1973. Now, some of you might say, 1973, that book's not old enough to be considered a work of classic literature. But I hate to break it to you, Gen X, but 1973, that was more than 50 years ago. More than 50 years ago. It's a long time ago. So I think we could safely consider Sula a classic. Toni Morrison, I think might be the greatest American novelist. That's, my opinion, but she is amazing. And Sula is actually a great entry point. If you've never read Toni Morrison before, you want to read Toni Morrison, I think Sula is a great place to start. I taught this novel for the first time this year and was really, really impressed with it. At its core, I think this novel is about the madness, the insanity of modern life. I think that's like the core of this novel. It begins, it's set in this town, which is referred to as Bottom, even though it's at the top of a hill. Like it's located very high up, but it's called the Bottom. And I think right away we're given this sense that things are topsy-turvy, right? That the bottom is the top. Like something is gone, something is upside down in modern life. And then right away in this novel, we meet this character Shadrach, who is a World War I veteran, and he suffers from shell shock or PTSD, and we see him suffering from hallucinations where things are changing shape and blurring into each other and nothing makes sense. So we're given these images very early in the novel that like the modern world does not make sense. Like the categories are not holding together. This is a classic conceit of modernist literature, post-war literature. And I think Morrison is working through something a little bit different with this insight, because her main characters are these two black women, Nell and Sula, and they are friends. We meet them when they're children, and then we follow them into adulthood. And I think in particular this problem of modernity, part of the problem of modernity is, in one sense, human history is like the story of progress and technological progress and scientific progress. And then we hit the First World War, and all of our technology and our pretensions to civilization just out the window, right? Like just anarchy and chaos and bloodshed and destruction. So like, are we getting better or are we getting worse? Like it's all very chaotic and confusing in the early part of the 20th century. And this problem, I think, is maybe particularly acute when you think about the lives of young black women in the early part of the 20th century, right? Because for them, all of the American ideals of freedom, of equality, of democracy, do those ideals, are those available to them? Those things that are supposedly offered by American life, are they available to these young women? I don't think they are. And I think that's kind of what the novel is exploring in a way. Sula is this character who is, she is kind of a social outcast, and she doesn't really want to fit in. Like she defies like both ethical and social norms. She does some strange things in this book. But I think part of what Morrison's working through is like, in a world, in a society that doesn't make any sense anymore, like what sense does it make to be a rule follower? So Sula makes up her own rules, and maybe that makes her like a problem, but maybe it makes her like radically free. The other kind of interesting thing about this book is I think it sort of posits, is friendship, particularly maybe friendship between women, is that a more solid foundation stone? Is that something more solid than even marriage or family is? Can a friendship be the foundation upon which you build the structure of your life? Next up, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Achebe is a Nigerian writer. This novel was written in the late 1950s. Things Fall Apart is among the most famous works of African literature. Its protagonist, Okonkwo, he's kind of like a tragic hero, or maybe like an anti-hero. I think that might be a way to approach this book. And he is this sort of domineering, abusive, a powerful patriarch. And in the novel, he commits multiple transgressions, some of them deliberate, some of them accidental, and he's banished. He's banished from his homeland. He has to go into exile with his family, and he has to spend 7 years living with his mother's people. And while he is gone, he finds out that white European settlers have moved in. They've colonized his home of Umofia. Christian settlers have arrived. They are trying to convert people, and conflict ensues. And when Okonkwo returns to his homeland, he comes into dramatic conflict with these European settlers. Maybe the greatest thing about reading classic literature is that you are afforded the opportunity to encounter people who are not like you, with ideas and opinions unlike your own, from worlds that are unlike your world. This is primarily just because classic literature was written in the past. These books are older. Typically, classic books, they're old. But in the case of something like Things Fall Apart, this is a Nigerian perspective on colonization. That is a perspective unlike my own. I don't have that perspective. This, I think, is one of the great gifts, one of the great joys of reading books like this. You can encounter, even immerse yourselves in cultures and perspectives that are unlike your own. You can meet different types of people with different priorities and different sensibilities. And also at the same, simultaneously, it's like magic. Simultaneously, almost paradoxically, you can also, like, you get this sense of your shared humanity, the things you have in common with other people. There are lots of ways that my community is not like the communities represented in this book, but in other ways, justice is prioritized, harmony is prioritized, relationships between parents and children they're a priority, but they're also fraught. These are all things we share, that we have in common. Achebe's main character, Okonkwo, I think you can think of him kind of like Melville's Ahab, or even someone like Odysseus. He's this great but flawed and in some ways terrible character who, he's like a tragic figure. He is a great character, and this is a great work of literature. Next book on the list, Jane Austen's Emma. This book is amazing. This book is amazing. Let me tell you why. Jane Austen wrote romance novels, comedies. It's a comedy, right? What happens at the end of comedy, at the end of Shakespeare comedies? What happens in the series finale of sitcoms? People get married. That's what happens. That's what's going to happen here. It's a comedy. It's a romance novel. People are going to get married. But the thing that's amazing, so many of our conventions, our romantic conventions, or, you know, rom-coms and romance novels, so many of them are traceable to Austen. Like Austen is, she's, I don't know, what could you say? You can't really overstate Austen. She's like on the Mount Rushmore of novelists. I think you could plausibly say she's one of the inventors of the novel. There were many novels written before Jane Austen wrote, but the way that she writes, it's like her effect on the novel is like the Beatles' effect on rock and roll. It's like that kind of influence. Emma Woodhouse, who's the protagonist of this novel, she likes to play matchmaker. That's what she likes to do. She likes to kind of be a puppet master and pair people up and try to get them married. That's how she likes to spend her time. And Emma's issue, she's wealthy. She's Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, rich. That's how she's introduced to us at the beginning of the novel. She has inherited all of these advantages, right? She's beautiful. She's born into a wealthy family. She's got like a doting father who's sort of hilarious. He's old and he's a hypochondriac, Mr. Woodhouse, who thinks everybody's going to get sick all the time. And Emma's problem, it's kind of, I don't know if she's arrogant or spoiled. The way the narrator describes her is that she gets too much her own way. The real evils indeed of Emma's situation were the power of having rather too much her own way and a disposition to think a little too well of herself. So on one level, this is a romance novel. You know, it's something like Charles Dickens. We get the story of Emma Woodhouse, who's a young woman, and she actually doesn't want to get married. That's kind of her thing. She imagines, I'm going to be single my whole life. I don't need to get married. I don't want to get married. And she's this sort of fiercely independent young woman. But then of course she catches feelings for various people, and her potential life of independence, her life being a single woman, that you know, that's the question. Is she going to get married or not? But then on another level, this book, Austen, is so good because this book is actually about knowledge and about self-knowledge. Because Emma is so confident in her own assessment of the world. She thinks she understands the world, herself, other people, other people's motives. She thinks she understands like everything that's happening. And she plays puppet master throughout the book, trying to like move people. Like, this is kind of mixing metaphors, like pieces on a chessboard or something. She's like a puppet master with chess pieces. Anyway, she's controlling. But as the novel progresses, Emma makes mistakes. She gets things wrong. She makes more mistakes. She gets more things wrong. And until she reaches a kind of crisis point where she realizes that she does not understand the world, other people, herself, all the things she thought she knew, she does not know. And Austen's genius is that we are like along for the ride. Like, she does things with her narration. She plays tricks on you as a reader. So you think something is happening, and then there's a surprise, and you realize that there's this whole other thing that's going on that you didn't see. But when you go back, Austen was breadcrumbing this the whole time. Like, she was telling you, she was giving you clues, but you didn't see it because we are just like Emma, and we think we know things when we don't know anything. That's like the lesson Austen wants to teach us with this book. Hey, here's another video I made. It's a beginner's guide to classic literature. You should check that out. I will see you there, and I'll talk to you soon.